Tariffs and the Tianjin Triumvirate. The United States' new tariff regime, effective August 27, 2025, is one of the most severe trade shocks India has faced in recent years. That's over two-thirds of India's $86.5 billion exports to the US that are now subject to prohibitive 25 to 50% duties. This affects critical labor intensive sectors such as textiles, gems and jewelry, shrimp, carpets, and furniture, all of which are no longer competitive and are certain to impact employment in these sectors. There's clothing from Tirupur, polished diamonds from Surat, shrimp from Andhra Pradesh, machinery from Noida and Chennai, and auto parts from western and southern India, all which run the risk of incurring losses adding up to tens of billions of dollars. Will that be in the short term? Can India weather the US tariff storm? Or do we turn to a new Tianjin triumvirate? China, Russia, India coming together to counter US bullying. Hello, everyone. I'm Neena Gopal. Welcome to the Global Express, where we deconstruct events that impact India and its neighborhood. With us is Richard Rossow, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. He holds the Wadhwani Chair in India-US Policy Studies. He was previously Deputy Director of the US-India Business Council, a leading advocacy group that worked at strengthening India-US economic ties in energy, information technology, and other key sectors. Welcome, Mr. Rick Russo. It's very nice to see you on the show. Will India slap retaliatory tariffs on American goods? What do you see happening, Mr. Russo?
I think at this point, India admirably is still trying to find a positive pathway through. We saw last time Trump was in office, and he threw tariffs on India and the world on steel and aluminum, with some exemptions. But India, of course, wasn't part of that exemption list. But also some other trade steps like revoking India's generalized system of preferences, trade preference program. India did come back with retaliatory tariffs at that point. At this point, India is actually not pushing back, trying to find a pathway through. And I think because the United States market is so vital for India, you'd rather find something positive if there's any chance at all. But we'll see. I mean, a week from now, we might be in a very different situation too if things continue to be jammed up. If the United States continues putting trade pressures on, maybe India chooses instead to pick up the gauntlet and fight back a bit. But at this point, still looking for a pathway through positively if it can.
During an official visit in February 2025, President Trump and Prime Minister Modi announced a series of trade targets. The implication was that there would be a wider trade deal, that was coming our way. So, I mean, the two leaders, they actually pledged to pursue a $500 billion in bilateral trade by 2030, which was, double the current volume. They promised to deepen US arms sales to India, the F-35 fighter jets acquisition. But why has Trump seemed to ignore India's defense purchases that are underway, and our energy imports, Mr. Rosso? What was this? I mean, why was that? Why was Prime Minister Modi's publicly committing to increasing energy imports, and reducing tariffs on American goods ignored? And this, these tariffs imposed. Is there a story behind the story? Is it because India did not keep its word, or was it India's misread? What was it all about?
There's a few things. One, despite the fact India is buying more American hydrocarbons and versus 25 years ago, a lot more defense material, the United States still has about a 2-to-1 trade deficit in goods trade. And both of our economies are far more services driven than manufacturing. But still, when you think about what your economy looks like, most people default think of manufacturing as the thing that drives the economy. It's not really the case for either of us, but still, that's what a lot of leaders think. So, President Trump has said last time in office, this time as well, countries with which the United States has large trade deficits are going to be targeted. And India certainly falls in that category. India is directly increasing purchases, the areas that you mentioned there. But I think to some extent, we haven't had significant announcements on major defense exports since President Trump came back into office. And India generally tries to avoid using specific defense purchases as a political tool. They let the combat commanders decide what they need for the, what product has the best fit. So it's hard to like push through fast big defense acquisitions, even when you've got a bit of a political imperative. I do like, something that the two leaders had laid out in that statement. When both of our countries, I think last time you had President Trump and Prime Minister Modi staring at each other in office, both leaders had kind of this mentality when we talk about manufacturing that making the final product and everything that goes into it is what manufacturing looks like. India has a lot more nuanced position now. You've seen a lot of India, how they've approached the budget, tariffs, that they kind of understand now that goods moving in is a critical part of goods going out, and that circularity, I think the Modi government has really taken that on board. It wasn't that case when they first came to office 11 years ago, but I think India has developed a much stronger, more nuanced view of what trade actually looks like. President Trump is not there. They still want to mine the stuff out of the ground all the way through final product. And that means that you're going to have some area of conflict. We both want to be great in semiconductors. We both want to be great in this and that. But in the joint statement, you at least had an idea in there, which, India wants to be great in semiconductors, but if you want to create a lot of employment, it's going to be in those sectors you mentioned on textiles, paper mills, a lot of basic industries. And for the United States, where we don't have quite the level of labor surplus India does, focusing on capital intensive industries makes a lot of sense. So if there is a pathway through, to me, an area where you've got real complementarity and hits what both of our countries need, I'd say like some of those items in that joint statement make a lot of sense. But as you rightly point out, despite India making some purchases, we still haven't managed to find a way through. President Trump seems absolutely committed on getting a level of agriculture market access that India would be unwilling to give for understandable reasons. So it's a tricky spot right now.
So, if we can go beyond this war of words, do you think that's the way forward? I mean, should India, continue to strengthen its strategic and defense ties and make much less of all this war of words that is going on between the two sides? I mean, you've had Peter Navarro, apparently, hitting out at India today, saying it's Russian funds, a Russian war machine again, all over again. So, I mean, I just want to know what you feel should be India's path in mending fences, or should it continue on this sort of very destructive spiral between the two?
Is playing it very, very smartly right now. Fighting is not going to help anyone. It's not really a trade war because so far it's only one side that's been, shooting artillery at the other side. India so far has, they've come out and thoughtfully presented a different view when things are brought up, but they haven't initiated major retaliation against the United States, things of that nature. Still trying to find a pathway through for getting this deal done, but also, as you both have mentioned, looking at alternative pathways as well. You already saw in the years leading up to this, India striking out, signing significant trade agreements with Australia, with UAE, with the Swiss-led EFTA group, with the UK. And a lot of this, happened before President Trump came to office, but I think it was kind of a recognition in Delhi. You're going to have Trump or people like Trump coming to office every couple of elections in the United States. This is probably going to be endemic. There's a large swath of the U.S. market that has felt that internationalization, deindustrialization, immigration, these things have really damaged a lot of communities, and they're not entirely wrong about that. But instead of voting for an inspiring leader that's trying to bring industry back, you've got somebody that's initiating firefights. So I think India's approach on this, I hope that they can stick to it because I would like to see a pathway through, and I think a deeper fight doesn't help either side. We've been in difficult situations before, right? I've been there front row seat in '98 with the nuclear test and sanctions. There you had an American president that chose that moment to try to build a new, deeper relationship rather than, keeping the pressure on for India to denuclearize. That was a critical moment. In 2013, when relations were in utter free fall, which were only repaired when India had a national election and we had a bit of a reset. We got two leaders that are both going to be in office for 3 and 4 years each now. There's not a lot of opportunity for that kind of mid-career course correct mid term course correction. The same people that made the mess are the ones that have to fix it. And so far, luckily, it's only one side that's been fighting. India is still thoughtfully trying to find a pathway through.
And do you think that the U.S. negotiators basically have also trashed this the trade deal, which the trade meeting that was supposed to happen and didn't? Is it because they're upset because they feel India's offers are insufficient compared to the deals that Washington has struck with other countries? Although Japan now has backed out of a meeting with the U.S. also on the same subject. So why doesn't Trump recognize, realistically, as someone to tell him that India's government or any government that comes in, whether it is Modi or anyone else, they cannot afford to alienate their vast rural voting base either. That's very important. So, and could Trump be persuaded to be a little less strident, particularly on agri imports?
We have a president who changes his mind often. So I think having somebody close to the president that understands what a real red line is in India. I fully understand most Indian farmers, which is the vast majority of the voting population, are poor subsistence farmers that can't get ag products on a U.S. plate. Whereas, U.S. ag industry with our efficient supply chains, cold chain storage, quick route to the ports, we can flood the Indian market, and that's very dangerous for India, for Indian voters, for Indian lives. But I don't know that we've got somebody that has the president's ear that understands this is not a negotiating red line. This is a real red line. And somebody's got to be able to communicate to the president to understand that, you can push to a certain extent, but not beyond that. You can't push a democratically elected leader to sign an agreement that would, dramatically disrupt the political base. We maybe, India's trying, as I understand, to put other sweeteners on the table to talk about other hydrocarbon or defense buys, maybe even some investments by Indian companies into the United States market. Those are sweeteners that might get the president a little bit more aligned with signing a trade agreement. Or maybe the president just wakes up one day and says, let's just get it done. We're gearing towards potentially a visit to India, which has been talked about for quite some time. Hopefully, it still happens for
Yes.
the Quad Leaders Summit. Sometimes these
Mhm.
kind of trips are action forcing events, and the president's going to want something big and significant and a really good trade deal rather than one that he would view as perfect. Maybe something that that appeals, and we get it done. So it could change in a moment's notice. Hopefully for the better, but there's always a chance things get worse from both sides.
So my last question to you, Mr. Rosso, because I know you have to go. India maintains a military that is said to be larger than Russia's. Its economy is growing at the rate of, it could soon be the third largest economy. And with all of this, Prime Minister Modi is going to arrive in Tianjin on Saturday and meet Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, on Sunday, possibly, and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. So India's close ties with Russia will be showcased. It's probably looking at new ties with China. There could be this new Tianjin triumvirate, is what I call it. But do you see this as geopolitically? Do you think India would actually align itself in this kind of a manner against the US, which I mean, both sides were very have worked very hard on this alliance over the last 20 years. So, do you think this Trump is jeopardizing that very well structured actually relationship?
Certainly jeopardizing. Luckily, I think we built up enough trust and credibility from surviving some really tough pain points in recent years that we've got some capital to spare. Hopefully, if we get the trade agreement done in short order, thinking it back on an even keel, we can recreate the other dialogues that kept up a high level of momentum. I'd like to see that happen because I think you're right to be concerned. I think the Shanghai Cooperation Organization has almost zero future as a cooperative organization. India is staring across the table at its two great rivals. How does that organization function? But the fact that it's meeting and India is there, when you've got a White House that looks at the news release and they jump at it sometimes, maybe you'll see other penalties announced. I mean, for President Trump to announce months ago that there'd be tariffs if the BRICS countries ever form a common currency, the impossibility of BRICS forming a common currency, because basically India would give the rupee to China to manage because China's larger than the rest of the BRICS economies together. If they ever pooled a currency, China would not cede its own authority. It would be a China-led currency, and we know the impossibility of India subscribing to that. But still, just the fact that that had been breathed before by BRICS was enough to get the president to come out publicly and say, if it ever happens, there'll be more tariffs. So, if the SEO meeting has a significant announcement, even if it's a lot of flash and not much substance, that could, I think, reinforce some of President Trump's negative images. But I do
What
think,
about, do you think
any party that's got.
do you think there's light at the end of this tunnel? I mean, you had Scott Bessent, the US Treasury Secretary, making some pretty positive remarks. I mean, he told Fox Business that India is the world's largest democracy, the US is the world's largest economy, and at the end of the day, they will come together. So, do you believe that is so, or will India continue to face the US heat?
Yeah, I think if we get the trade agreement done, which again really is not, there's not a lot more that India can do on that. It's up to the president of the United States, and anybody that claims they can predict what the president's going to do in the next 4 hours is really kind of kidding themselves. So the fate of the relationship lies with one single person right now. I think India's put as much as they can reasonably on the table to try to get the trade agreement done. That's the main sticky point. To some extent, you might say immigration as well, because one thing that we haven't talked about that I'm actually probably in some ways more worried about is what we're hearing right now is a massive decline of Indian students coming and studying in the United States. So
Mm.
you've got other pain points as well, not just the trade agreement, but the trade agreement is the one that's on the front of the government leaders' minds right now. And we could be a week away from getting this done and dusted and moving on to very positive things, or a week away from a further kind of spiraling. But it all rests with one single person right now. But I think we might be looking back in this moment 3 months from now with a trade agreement in hand, the other dialogues reconstructed, and the relationship back on a very strong position. It's totally possible, but I can't predict what that one single person that holds the deal in the pocket is going to do when it gets presented again. Is there enough sweeteners on there? Has enough been added? It's a very tricky situation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rosso. I do want to say that India's sweetener of offering to buy the GE, the 113 more engines for its Tejas fighter jets, is quite a big move on its part. But thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Rosso. I do appreciate you being there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for watching Global Express. Do click and view and subscribe and share. Thank you.